Welcome to Truth Talk, a talk show that's about truth, that's sometimes hard but very necessary. It's also ordinary people doing extraordinary things. And this show is going to be different the next 2 weeks as we have filmed some speakers that was at a conference and luncheon that was for God's hope for the grieving heart. Uh, this couple gave their testimonies, shared what God had done with them through a time of grieving, a time of loss. It's David and Patty Rutledge. They live in Columbus, North Carolina, which is a small town on the South Carolina border. And Patty, she has a master's degree in counseling and has had a part time counseling ministry for years. She's also been a stay at home mom. David, he served for 30 years as a police officer and retired from the Asheville Police Department as a lieutenant in 2009. David became also a Billy Graham Rapid Response Team chaplain in November of 2018. And in October of 2019, David joined the full time staff of the Rapid Response Team of the National Law Enforcement Ministry. So, David helped develop the law enforcement chaplain training program and has taught all over the United States and internationally. But he continues to teach the chaplain training for Billy Graham on a contact basis. God has continued to use Patty and David to minister to others. This show, as it begins today, is going to start with them as we were in this conference and dinner event for God's Hope for the Grieving Heart that Katrina Maloney and Ginger Williams has been on our show before. They're the ones that heads this up in our community church at New Beginnings Church. This conference was amazing, and I hope that it'll bless you like it blessed me. So let's get to our program.
Very good. I'm going to introduce our speakers, but before they come, I want to tell you about them a little bit. I met David and then Patty when David and I were on staff together at the Billy Graham Rapid Response Team in Charlotte. And I learned about David, and he was a police officer for 30 years, and I heard stories, but I also police officers are a little bit, they're rough a little bit. And David's the same way. And you get to talking to him about his granddaughter or his wife, and he kind of soft in the middle. So David and I got acquainted as we worked together at the program Rapid Response Team. David and Patty are the definition of servant leaders. They see a need and they run to it. They didn't hesitate when I called, when I texted, and said, David, would you please come to speak? And he said, sure. I mean, it was like, yeah, sure. They live 2.5 hours away, and they drove here today to speak to our group. So David's retired police, where he ran into trauma and suffering for 30 years. Patty was a counselor and attending to the emotional and spiritual needs of those in crisis. They continue to work and help people in crisis every day. And as I said, David and I had cubicles right beside each other, and there were many, many discussions regarding the losses we were both grieving. And they have a God story to tell. Would you please welcome David and Patty Rutledge?
Well, as I said, my name's David Rutledge. This is my wife, Patty. You can read about our bio, so we're not going to cover a lot. I've been married 45 years. When we tell the story of our granddaughter today, one of the things that I want you to see about this, there's two things I would like for you to come away with. Understanding, first of all, that there is nothing wasted in God's economy. Ever. Nothing's ever wasted. And the second thing is, on the other side of your trials and pain lies somebody else's deliverance. Because God uses everything we've been through to equip us to minister to other people. And so we want you to listen to our story and to listen to Julia's story with that in mind, with those two things in mind. Julia was born July 11th of 2008. That's her when she was 8 months old. I was about 30 days from retirement. I retired on April 1st of 2009. And so that's her, and we kept Julia a lot, so we got very close with her. She was just, Julia was special. We used to say that she was an old soul. She had an intuitive understanding, seemed like beyond her years with people. And so she was our first grandchild and just very, very special to us. In August of 2012, we had kept Julia overnight. And Patty noticed the next day she was getting ready to take Julia back to her mom and noticed that Julia was having trouble with her right hand. She was normally right-handed, loved to color, and she was trying to color with her left hand. And so Patty told my daughter took her to the emergency room at a small regional hospital near us. They weren't equipped to do MRIs, or they didn't have a lot of specialists on call, so they recommended that our daughter take her to a pediatric neurologist and gave her a referral follow-up. And then I'll let you, if you want to tell the next day when.
So the next day, Jessica, our daughter, called me and was sort of frantic that Julia's right leg was not working. So what she was doing was every step that she took, her leg involuntarily went in a circle. And so that's when I said we need to get her to Mission immediately. And so we took her to Mission, and they did a CAT scan, and that actually came out clean. But then they said they needed to sedate her the next day and do an MRI, and that's when they found a tumor.
Yeah. And that's Julia at the beginning of the summer of 2012. And the next day they were doing the MRI, took her down about lunchtime, and supposed to take about an hour. And I was sitting in Julia's room by myself. Patty had a counseling appointment. And we were expecting because the CT was clear, we were expecting the MRI to be pretty routine. Well, it took about 3 hours before anybody checked in on us, and I'm thinking, why is it taking so long? And a nurse stuck her head in the room and said, has anybody talked to you yet? How many of you know that's never a good sign in a hospital? And so I said, no. And she said, who are you? And I said, I'm the maternal grandfather. And she said, well, we're moving your granddaughter to pediatric ICU. And I said, okay. And I'm thinking at that point, maybe she's not recovering from the anesthetic. Maybe they're a little worried about her breathing or something like that. And I said, wow, what's the problem? And she said, they found something on the MRI. And I said, is it a brain tumor? And she said, yes. And so at that point I'm thinking, and we were moving her bed over to ICU because all her stuff was on it, and that was easier than trying to transfer all the stuff. And so I was thinking, okay, this is something we can deal with. We'll figure it out. There'll be treatments. This will be a hard road, but we'll get through this. And as we're taking her bed out of her room, we go past the peds nurses station, and I notice that all of the nurses are crying. And I'm thinking, what's going on here? So we get over to ICU, and Patty's back by that time. Julia's back. And one of us needs to go in with the doctor. So Patty kept Julia, and I went in with the doctor. And the doctor started off by saying, the news we've got for you is very, very grim. And Julia had what is known as a diffuse intrinsic pontine glioma, a DIPG. If you Google that, You're going to find out more about that than you ever want to know. They are almost universally a death sentence. The 3-year survival rate on them is less than 10%. The 5-year survival rate is 0. They are almost always diagnosed in children between the ages of 4 and 12 years of age. It is not a disease of adults. It's rare, 100 to 150 a year in the United States. And Julia's was a grade 3 anaplastic astrocytoma. They gave her 9 to 13 months. Needless to say, we're devastated. They make arrangements to airlift her to Chapel Hill to the Children's Hospital there. And all throughout what we went through, God shows up at different times. We get to Chapel Hill and we find out that Dr. Ewan, who was the chief pediatric neurosurgeon, he's personally taking her case. And he was at Johns Hopkins at the same time that Ben Carson was there. So, it's like God saying, okay, I'm with this with you, however it turns out. So we were there at Chapel Hill for 2 weeks. They did exploratory surgery because a part of the tumor was sticking out of the brainstem and they could get to it. The problem with these particular tumors, chemotherapy doesn't cross the blood-brain barrier. So chemotherapy is not effective. Surgery is out of the question because the tumor and the brainstem itself are indistinguishable. They're the same color. They can't tell which is which. And the brainstem controls the breathing, heart rate, everything. So the surgeon told us, he said, if I operate and touch that brainstem, it'll kill her. So the most they can do is they can do radiation. They do it 5 days a week for 6 weeks every morning. And it's a lifetime dose of radiation, and it basically shrinks the tumor but doesn't cure it. And it buys you time. So we come back from Chapel Hill and she's going to do the radiation at Mission Hospital. And at one point, very shortly thereafter, I was keeping Julia. Her mom and dad were doing some errands, and Patty, I think, had some counseling appointments. So I was keeping Julia, and she drew me this picture. And she said, Papa, I'm drawing this because I'm in love with you and you're in love with me. I said, that's good, honey. She said, that's my heart and that's your heart. And I said, that's great. And notice the attempt at a mustache and a goatee on the bottom heart. And I said, that's really good. But I don't think my hair looks like that. And she looked at me just as serious as she could be seen and said, Papa, that's not hair. Those are chains, so my heart never drifts away from your heart. So that gives you an idea of kind of her thinking. Now, we're going through all of these emotions at this particular time. And we may answer some of the questions that you wrote as we go along through our presentation where they're appropriate. And I know one of the things that I went through was a lot of anger at God. I was very angry at God for at least part of this. I'm thinking, how do we win the evil lottery like this? So this disease is so rare. How did it land in my family? Are we being punished for something? Is there something that we've done? Why us kind of thing? And by the way, why is a useless question. Because the answer is not something we can usually understand. But I'm sitting there wrestling with this, and I had someone tell me it's okay to be mad at God. If you read the Psalms, David was very raw in a lot of the Psalms and angry with God in some of the Psalms. And it was, in fact, this particular person said, God's a big boy. He can handle this. And God sort of gave me a mental image of it. And it was like some of the old Spanky and Our Gang shows where the bully is got the kid by the hair, holding him off, and the kid's swinging, and can't even get close to the bully, and he waits till he exhausts himself. And it was kind of like I was swinging at God, and God was just waiting. And when I was exhausted, he said, okay, you ready to talk now? You ready to do this? But just went through a whole gamut of emotions, from hope and fear to grief to sometimes feeling like, okay, maybe there's hope, this will be okay. Sometimes just it's awful. Well, how do we get into this? So if you want to tell a little bit about maybe what you were feeling during that time.
It is a roller coaster. We were in shock for a long time, just sitting stunned that this had happened, and then seeing this beautiful little girl, and just knowing, trying to have hope, trying to gather everybody that you can to pray. One thing I think that it sort of tore down my faith, but built it up in a different way. And one thing that it definitely taught me was, I guess in our heads we think, oh, if we can just get this person to pray, they have more faith than I do. If we can just get this team to pray or whatever, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I think that too often we depend on that. There was times that I didn't even know what to say or how to pray. I had prayed everything I could think of, prayed every verse we could think of. And sometimes you've got to be still, and but do not depend on one person. Like sometimes we'll have intercessory teams or prayer warriors, we call them, or whatever. And it's like sometimes we trust in that just a little too much, And so do not ever think that your prayer is less than somebody else's prayer, because sometimes we measure people and we think they have more faith or whatever, and maybe they do. But it's just as important for you to pray. And a lot of times I just sat and went, I have no idea what to say to you, God. No clue. I don't know how to pray. I don't know what to speak. I don't know what more to say or what more to pray. And sometimes, quite frankly, I was exhausted, emotionally exhausted, and there was nothing else I could do. But one thing is, like, God's okay with that. He is okay with that. He's okay with our exhaustion. He's okay with I don't know what else to say or pray. He is so okay with that, and he understands that. So, there was a lot of pressure, to fast or to pray a certain way. And sometimes that's a lot of human pressure that God's not really putting on us. We put it on ourselves, or we take it on from other people. So that's just one caution, I think, and just bringing it down to normalize it. And we're human. We are human. And this is a very tough situation. We're feeling a lot of things, dealing with a lot of different people. And then we had a whole host of people praying for us, and I'll let you tell about that.
One of the things, there's a lot of negative things about social media, and quite frankly, it causes a lot more problems, I think, than it has ever solved. But in our particular instance, through social media, through contacts we had, people that house churches, especially overseas, that knew people who were the head of certain chains of churches, we figured at one point we had probably almost 1 million people praying for Julia in 25 countries by name. And one of the things that that made me realize was, it's not about faith or lack of faith. How do 1 million people not have enough faith for God to heal this little girl? Okay. And what it drove home for me was he's sovereign. Yes, he wants us to pray. He wants us to ask. He wants us to do that. But at the same time, in those kinds of things, he is sovereign. It is his choice and his will. And I have no idea what he has saved Julia from. I have no idea what the future held. All I know is he is sovereign, and it is his will. And we had to lean on that. It was interesting. We had one of the girls in our church, one of the pastor's daughters, set up a Praying for Julia in Pink Day. And people would take pictures of themselves in pink and would post it to this Facebook account. And we had pictures of people, groups of people from Africa, from Argentina was one of them, from Turkey was another. And my last 3 years with the police department, I was a district commander for West Asheville. It's everything west of the French Broad River. It's the smallest district geographically, but the busiest. And all of my officers put these huge pink bows on their cruisers and drove around on this Praying for Julia in Pink Day. So Julia starts the radiation therapy, started that in October, and then it ended late November. They did another MRI in the 1st of December, showed the tumor had shrunk significantly. At the start, it was about the size of a man's thumb. By December, it had shrunk to the size of a thumbnail. And the radiologist told us there's a possibility, he said, I don't want to raise false hope. There's a possibility what is left is cellular debris and scar tissue from the tumor. He said, we'll just have to see. And he did say that Julia had a beautiful brain. So we go on, had a good Christmas, go through the next spring, winter and the spring. The Easter Sunday that year was the 31st of March, and my father had his second stroke, which proved to be fatal. He died about 8 days later. Julia had an MRI again the 1st of April. Everything looked great. We go through all the funeral for my dad, all of those things. And then in late May, we noticed that Julia was beginning to have trouble with her right hand again. So they scheduled an MRI. The tumor was growing again, but it was not nearly as big as at the start. And they scheduled her for experimental chemotherapy at Duke. And we're going to try something. So we were okay. She was having a significant amount of back pain at the time. And we were thinking initially it's muscular, something's going on there. So they scheduled a spinal MRI a couple of weeks later, this MRI at the end of June, and turned out the tumor had spread all down her spine. The radiologist described it as being like candle wax stripped down her spine. And it created several lesions in the lining of her brain. At that point, they stopped everything except palliative care to keep her comfortable, and basically said she has 30 days. So immediately, Make-A-Wish arranged a trip for her to Hawaii, and with my daughter and her husband. And my daughter's husband was not Julia's biological father. But he is an amazing guy. He could not have loved her more if she was his daughter. And she loved him. But they arranged, because Julia wanted to see a volcano re-erupt. And in her word, volcanoes re-erupted, they didn't erupt. And bathwater reflowed, it didn't overflow. And you got reprises, not surprises. So they went, and that's her in Hawaii. She got to pet dolphins, got to tour a volcano, went to a seahorse farm, and that's my daughter, and then my son-in-law is the one with the tattoo on his arm. And she got to pet dolphins. By the end of the Make-A-Wish trip, she was having trouble walking again. On the flight back to Charlotte, she had a seizure on the plane, and they went straight from Charlotte, from the airport there, to ICU at Mission Hospital. She spent her 5th birthday in ICU. They released her the next day, sent her home on heavy-duty pain medication, and just said, referred her to hospice, and said, we're just going to keep her comfortable. So we tried to spend as much time with her as possible. And as you imagine, we're going through all these emotions, everything's up and down, trying to figure out, how do we live with this? How do we survive this? And it literally felt some days like you're just trying to survive. If I can just put one foot in front of the other and get through this day, you know, and then you'd wake up sometimes in the middle of the night and it wasn't any better, you know. So we're just trying to concentrate everything on her and trying to spend as much time as we can with her. At the beginning of the summer, right after that we got that kind of word, she had told our oldest son that she was sad and she was scared. And so after not too long after the trip, she's bedridden. She can't walk now. And the book on these tumors is they gradually paralyze them as they grow. We get up to about the end of August, and our daughter told us, and this is the part where I'm still amazed, told us that Jesus was visiting her. And she had told my daughter that he took her horseback riding all over the world, and that he rode a white horse. And we had never talked to her about that part of it, never said anything about that. And so she also said, and this was kind of amusing, she said that she and Jesus played the memory game with the cards, where you remember they were, and that she won. And my daughter said, well, honey, he must have let you win because he knows everything. And she said, he did. You know, it was kind of amazing. The thing that really struck us, Patty's dad had died when Julia was about 1. And my dad had died that spring. And we were both questioning whether they really knew the Lord. We had seen some evidence, not a lot, just didn't know. And we had said, Lord, is there something you do? Well, Julia told us she saw both of them in heaven. She saw both of them there, and she said that my dad had a beard. And if you knew my dad, he hated beards. So he would have never even jokingly talked to Julia about that. And so, I'm questioning, and Patty, I think, sort of was too. What is this? The pain medication? Is this she's imagining? What is all this? Is this real? And I'll tell you what sealed it for me, and Patty can speak for herself. What sealed it for me was she told our oldest son that she was no longer sad, she was no longer scared, and everything was going to be okay. And for me, at least, that was like, wow, okay, that's real. And one time, not too long after that, I was back in the bedroom with her. It's just her and I was reading the Bible to her. She loved the stories of Daniel in the lion's den and Moses and the 10 plagues. Figure that a 5-year-old loves the plagues, okay? But I was reading to her, and I said, honey, your mom says Jesus has been visiting you, right? And she said, uh-huh. And I said, has he told you if he's going to heal you here or if you have to go live with him? And she looked at me and said, live with him. And she knew. I did not tell anybody that. I kept that to myself till after she was gone, because I was thinking, if I tell this, is it going to cause somebody not to pray? Is it going to cause them to and I kept that to myself. And I'll let you kind of.
Okay. So at that time, after that, she went colorblind because of the pressure on her eyes, and then she went blind. So she couldn't see past a certain point. And so I was back there with her, and she was looking at a blank wall in the bedroom of my daughter's house, and she said, Beth, she called me Beth. She goes, Beth, pretty soon I'm going to have to go over there. And I said, well, where, honey? And she goes, over there. Don't you see? I said, no, I don't see. And she got pretty agitated, pretty frustrated with me because I couldn't see what she could see. And she said, I'm going to have to, and it was a sense of urgency. I'm going to have to go over there. And I really thought she was going to go that night, right then. I really thought she was going to go. And that is an example of she was blind, but she could see. and I could see, but I was totally blind. And so, sometimes we don't see it, and it changed my view of people in comas, people that are unconscious, people like she would lay there and you would think she was asleep or whatever, but yet she was communing with God and she was doing things with Jesus. And when my dad died, she was 13 months old, and no one, because she was the first grandchild, she didn't know to call him Great Pippaw. But yet when she saw him in heaven, she knew who he was and called him Great Pippaw. I saw Great Pippaw in heaven. We'd never used that term with her because he was gone and we hadn't, shown her his picture or, made that a big deal. So she had never, and my kids called him Pippaw, not Great Pippaw. So it was just so many confirmations. And it was such a sweetness, I think, of even though we were going through a bad time, God to send a message to us from this little girl that your dads are with me, and then the kindness of his heart when a little girl is scared to let her get to know him and feel safe with him before he took her with him. So it was just layers of things that answered prayers in all different directions. People prayed that were mad at God and had been estranged from God, but yet they said, a little girl brought me back to God. And a couple of marriages came back together because of Julia. So we had a lot of different things going on, a lot of different layers, rather, other than just Julia's issue and Julia's physical pain. So I think it was an encouragement to a lot of people. And so we always said, we're going to pray, we're going to hold out our faith, and we're going to do that, but God is going to have the last word. But until he has the last word, then doctors say one thing, but God has the last word, and we're going to trust him with that. But just that Jesus visited, and she said he didn't have long hair like you think he does. And, one of our regrets is not showing her Akiani. I don't know if you know Akiani, that her picture of Jesus. We really wish before she had gone blind that we had said, is this who you're seeing? And let her see that picture and that painting of Jesus that is absolutely astounding.
And tell her what